This is Ann Babson again. I would normally say these things in a classroom. Instead, I will say them to you here. I have written a PowerPoint presentation lecture I'm calling Catching More Flies with Honey Just Gets You a Swarm of Flies. 5 rules about how to argue and win. You all were raised right. Your mom has taught you to be polite, to say yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I'm not sure that's the most helpful set of instructions for winning an argument, particularly as you write an essay. I'm not asking you to abandon the values of your family, but I am asking you to consider putting them aside so that you can make an appeal to your readers that is not so polite as to be unintelligible. I love living in the South. You all know I'm not from down here. My students in the South are wonderful people. Here you see some of my former students when I was teaching while doing doctoral work at the University of Mississippi. These ladies have a lot of manners. Um, they are kind and gracious. One thing they are not fond of is arguing. Arguing does not feel natural or comfortable to them. I was shocked by this, given who I used to teach. These young women, oh my goodness, some of them were just raised to right to win an argument. I'm not sure that's helpful. I think that people need to know how to both be courteous and gracious and also willing to win. Here is a picture. Just look at the different color scheme of the clothing of the students in this picture. This is a group of students that I used to teach years and years ago when I was getting my master's degree at the City University of New York. These kinds of students are brilliant. Don't mess with these women. Here are some things you should know about them. They are smart. They are resilient. My goodness, we had just survived September 11th, and there they were in the classroom, too busy to worry about anything else. And they can win an argument with an angry NYPD cop or a snooty waiter. Why? Because every New Yorker has to learn how to have these skills in a place where 8 million people are packed right on top of one another like sardines. You have to learn how to negotiate, how to compromise, and sometimes you have to elbow your way to the front. And sometimes, if somebody is trying to elbow you out of the way, you have to say, no, you can't do that. And you have to learn how to do that. And eventually to persuade other people to agree with you, which is what an argument essay attempts to do. People up north start learning how to argue when they are really, really young. It was part of dinner table time at holidays in my family that young children were encouraged to participate in gentle rhetorical debates over dessert sometimes. By the time I was 8, I had a grasp of how to organize a debate because that was what it was like. And even less intellectual families than mine might have a similar penchant for debate and discussion. It's just part of being a New Yorker. The way that, how many people do you know who neither know how to hunt or fish at all? Let me say, how many young men, particularly, do you know who have never held a fishing pole or a gun in their hand? That's an unusual state of affairs if you are um, uh, in the deep South. I would say that in New York City, while we don't do much fishing or hunting, we sure do know our way around an argument. Here is rule one of arguments. Pick a side. Don't be too polite to pick a side. The purpose of a good argument essay would require the author not to remain neutral. It's not a neutral exercise. The author must clearly state a particular perspective about an issue and argue in favor of it. That is paramount. He or she doesn't tell the reader to make up his or her own mind. I imagine you were malpracticed by some very well-meaning teacher who told you to do that. Not in college. You want to have your own perspective. There are times where you will present information on both sides of a case, but ultimately, even in the most diplomatic of situations, you must have a side. In an informed argument essay, you begin, your thesis is the beginning of the argument. And just to give you some perspective, imagine for a moment that you were on trial. The man in the black suit with the blue, I can't tell if that's a necktie or simply a shirt. He's an attorney. Would you rather, if you were on trial, have the attorney say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my wonderful client has been wrongly accused of a heinous crime, or would you rather he or she said, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm leaving it up to you to decide what you think about whether or not this guy is guilty. I read some stuff about him, but it's whatever. I'm just quoting stuff I looked up. Fire the second attorney. You would want someone to defend you. A good argument defends a thesis. It argues for a perspective. That is your job. Don't be shy. Here is rule 2 of arguments. Appeal both to the heart and the mind of the reader. The best arguments appeal both to logic and emotion. Logic would have me understand that if I invest my money in a company based on past experience, I might expect to make a profit. Pathos is the emotional appeal. These are logos and pathos are words that the Greeks invented to talk about rhetoric. The ancient Greeks loved a good argument as well. An emotional appeal may not really require much logic. It's not particularly logical, no doubt, that this older gentleman loves this cat that sheds all over his sofa and probably tears up a variety of things with his claws in his house, but he nevertheless clearly does. The perfect argument, it makes me invest both my mind and my heart in the idea that is presented to me. I wanted to tell you also that a good argument may not always yell, but it doesn't waffle or flip-flop. For instance, I have two photographs deeply contrasting in terms of tone, where there are women arguing against Vladimir Putin. Here is our former Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice. She was Secretary of State during the George W. Bush administration, and she is having a conversation with Vladimir Putin. She was known, and I believe she was even hired to be Secretary of State because she had a hard line against Russia. She's surely cordial. She's surely polite. Mr. Putin is smiling politely, it would seem. But she is also, if you look at her eyes, as serious as a heart attack. She is not giving an inch of ground, however politely she says what she has to say. Here are a very different group of women. They are probably not personal acquaintances of Condoleezza Rice, I'm guessing. This is the most courageous punk band in the history of punk. They are Pussy Riot. Some of them went to Siberia for their protest songs against Vladimir Putin's government. You can see them here in Red Square making a video. Their music is frankly screamo. I thought about including it in this particular video. I decided against it because I thought it might be distracting. My point here in showing you two different approaches by women arguing against the same set of policies, frankly. One speaks in a quiet and firm authority. The other one is ready to smash stuff up. Um, Seriously, there's this video of Pussy Riot that is astonishing. Once some of their members were sent to Siberia, there was this giant poster hanging on a construction site of Vladimir Putin. It was like 6 stories tall. They played a song on top of the building across the street from it with an electric guitar, wearing those ski masks you see in the picture. And then they threw a Molotov cocktail on the poster, and the poster caught on fire. It was brave. It was indomitable. Oh my goodness. I'm not calling it a logical appeal necessarily, but my goodness, it did something to my emotions to watch them be so brave. In any case, yeah, I'm not fond of dictators generally, and Pussy Riot isn't either. Some arguments are loud and passionate, others are quiet and firm. Neither Ms. Rice nor the ladies of Pussy Riot flip-flop on anything. Here is rule 3 of arguments. Consider counter-arguments and then refute them. Your reader may not believe you right away, and that's not a problem, really. It's your job to persuade him or her. If there was nothing to argue in favor of or against, that where there might be a disagreement, frankly, there would be no purpose in the argument at all. Your job is to persuade with your words. And in order to do that, you have to consider respectfully and ultimately disprove counterarguments. Hearing the other side out is not just good manners. The kind, by the way, that the people who said you catch more flies than honey, with honey, rather, I should say, probably intended you to have. But also, it's a fine strategy for bringing people along to thinking the way you do. I'm giving you a couple of examples here. I'm using the example of my paper topic of whether or not we should have billionaires as role models. And in your paper, you might include a paragraph that weighs counter arguments and refutes them specifically about this man. If I'm saying that billionaires make wonderful role models, I'm going to have to reckon with this man's record. He is one of the richest people who ever lived and one of the worst. He made a fortune from diamonds in southern Africa, which sounds harmless when I just say it like that, but he did it by basically enslaving a whole region of people and killing thousands of Africans. He was a horrible human being. Until the late 1970s, the country that he founded, Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe after its revolution, was truly the most racist and exploitive place on earth, bar none. And I think you already know that's saying something. And it took a war to end his evil legacy. He was truly an evil man. Also, a billionaire. What do you say about a guy like that? Or if your paper is saying that billionaires are horrible, you're going to have to deal with Bill Gates. Why is Bill Gates some kind of counter argument fodder? Well, he and his wife Melinda started a foundation that has done extraordinary things with their money to help people in the most vulnerable circumstances who have health crises that probably wouldn't exist in the United States. One example of that is, we managed to prevent polio since about the 1950s. We've largely eradicated it because of good nutrition, good health care systems that protect children with things like vaccinations. And that's just not been so in India. It used to be like 3 million children a year in India or something like that, or maybe it was 3 million, not a year, but 3 million children had polio when Bill and Melinda Gates started their foundation. Today, there are no new cases for many years of polio in India. They eradicated it. That's remarkable. What a blessing. So if I'm going to say that billionaires are the worst, I'm going to have to deal with that because that's not the worst thing that ever happened on earth. That's actually a good thing. So how can I wrestle with it? I have some ideas about how you can weigh counterarguments honestly and refute them. You can't just assume people who disagree with you are stupid. That's not a way. So what do? There are 3 steps. First, I fully acknowledge what people on the other side of my argument might reasonably think. Not everyone's going to agree with me, especially at first blush. Then I explain why, even if they are correct about certain points, they have either paid too much attention to one thing or too little to another, or I explained how they have not considered the unfortunate consequences of their preference. There was some side effect, some aftershock that what made what they thought was perfect not so perfect. And then, thirdly, I restate why my position is better than theirs. Not that I'm better than they are, but that I've thought it through better. Here's an example. I've taken the one with Bill Gates as my counterargument. So step 1, while Bill Gates has done amazing things to help poor people overcome health crises through his foundation, that's step 1, it is important that we acknowledge that the way he earned enough money to be so charitable was by creating poor people by putting small tech businesses out of business. That's a fair case against what Bill Gates did in making Microsoft a giant company. Even the best of billionaires has surely crushed more poor people's dreams than he has allowed to bear fruit. I basically found a new way to say, yeah, billionaires bad, not role models. You can see how this follows 3 steps. I think here is rule 4 of arguments. Nobody gets persuaded by an argument unless the author organizes his or her ideas. People who get up and just randomly start talking and it's all brilliant just have a lot of experience talking. How do I know this? Because I'm one of those people who gets asked to make extemporaneous speeches, and I was a professional speech writer for years. So yeah, I know how to organize in my head super fast because I do this all the time. You, on the other hand, student writer, should think about what logical steps it would take for someone to be persuaded over to your side of an argument and to make an outline that allows you to follow a path toward leading the maybe skeptical reader over to your side. Without an outline, it's not that I'm going to check that you have an outline, but I'll know whether or not you used one based on how well organized your ideas are. Nobody can quite follow your way of thinking about a matter without you having organized your thoughts. You are the tour guide of your ideas, so you need to curate them for the reader. Rule 5 of arguments is this. Every idea you present must be backed up with evidence. Even if this wasn't a paper assignment that required research, you would still need to have some logical evidence for why you believe what you believe. In this case, you must do research. Good for you, the library is open at its regular hour. To persuade, your argument must be informed. Let's think about this for a minute. First of all, having an opinion without evidence is only an ignorant prejudice. An example of this would be the idea that the world was flat. Have you really investigated it? No, but I just kind of feel it because, I mean, it's not like I feel like I'm standing on a beach ball. That's an ignorant prejudice. Here we have a female Sherlock Holmes who is looking at a clue. So having an opinion of something based on evidence is usually a sign of intelligence. There are things called logical fallacies, which will not be the subject of this presentation, but nevertheless, you want to have evidence in order to be able to make a claim of any kind. And if you have a logical claim, you are onto something more likely than not. Having an opinion based on evidence that weighs counter arguments is by far the best. Here we have one of my heroes. She's my role model. She is not a billionaire. She is a student at Oxford University right now. She's a teenage girl named Malala Yousafzai, who is from Pakistan, who advocated in, I think, a vlog that she did when the Taliban took over for girls' education, and she was going to school in dangerous times, and a Talibani who knew her blog decided to take a hit out on her and shot her in the face. I think she was 15 years old, 16 years old. She was some shockingly young age. He just got on the bus and shot a bullet in her head. She miraculously survived, got surgery. You can see that she has one cheek that's slightly different looking than the other. That's because of that. But here she is, bless her, collecting her Nobel Prize for Peace. Why? Because she was not backing down. Her argument appeals to both logic and emotion. She is firm in her convictions that girls worldwide need education and that this will benefit societies all over the world as a whole. Planet Earth will be better, she says, because girls learn to read and write and can make more literally educated choices with their adult lives later on. I think she's awesome. Also at 17, whatever you did, you didn't win the Nobel Prize for Peace, I tell you what. She's pretty impressive. But as for the flies with honey, according to me at least, that just gets you sticky flies. I would prefer a Nobel Prize to sticky flies. I would urge you to take these steps and write me an excellent paper. Thank you.